Hey guys, welcome to lesson 2.1.1. The goals for today are to multiply binomials, factor a quadratic, complete the square, and understand the difference between the three forms of quadratic equations. So let's start with multiplying binomials. Okay, we're going to use something called the box method, and when we are using the box method, we are literally going to draw a box. Sorry, my box is a little questionable. Y'all know how I am about this pen. Alright, so in order to do this, right, we're going to do a 2 by 2 box, and the reason for that is because there's two terms in each set of parentheses. So we're going to have one set of parentheses on one side, and the other one on the other side. Now notice how for the x minus 5 I'm putting the negative sign with the 5 because we need to make sure that if there's a minus it's included with the number. Alright, and now we're going to go ahead and multiply everything in here. So when we're doing this we have to think about it kind of in terms of area. So like if I was finding the area of this box, I would need to do the base times the height. So x times x would get me x squared. Okay, so here we have 4 times x, that's 4x. Here we have negative 5 times x, negative 5x. And then negative 5 times 4, so negative 20. Alright, once you go ahead and do all the multiplication in the box, we're just going to go ahead and lay out everything that we've come up with, right? We have, oh, that's ugly. We have an x squared. We have a positive 4x. We have a negative 5x, and we have a negative 20. So now, we can go ahead and simplify a little bit. We're like, okay, well, these two are both x terms, so we can combine those. And so our final product here will be x squared, 4x minus 5x, that's negative 1x, and then minus 20. Okay, and so this is our final standard form product of those two binomials. And something to note too, these guys in this diagonal, those are always going to combine. Okay, so always be on the lookout for that. Alright, so now we are on to factoring and completing the square. Now, factoring is a method that we use to convert our equation from standard form to factored form. Okay, and then to get to graphing form, that's when completing the square comes in. Now for factoring, we're going to use something called the box and diamond method. Now, kind of like last time, we're going to start by making a box. I'm really trying. Alright, and again, it's going to be your 2 by 2 window looking thing. Now there's some setup that goes into this. Okay, so you start with your first term, you put that in your first box. Yikes. There we go. Whatever. Alright, and your third term is going to go in the bottom right box. That is always going to be how you start with these problems. Okay, and now our goal is to figure out what goes in these two boxes. Now that's when the diamond comes in. It's not actually a diamond, it's kind of more of an X, but we just call it a diamond. Alright, so we know that we're essentially trying to figure out how to fill in these two boxes. So what we need to do is in the top here, we get to put your first term times your third term. So x squared times negative 15, that equals negative 15x squared. So that's what we're going to put up here. It's always the first times the third. Alright, and then for the bottom, it's always going to be your middle term. So 2x. Now, we get to kind of play a game. That's what I like to call it, right? We want to know, okay, what two numbers multiply to make the top, and what two numbers add to make the bottom. Whatever two numbers we pick has to fulfill these two conditions. So we say, okay, well, we know that 5 times 3 makes 15, but because we need it to be negative, one of those is going to have to be negative. So we play around with it a little bit, and then we realize, okay, well, if we did 5x and negative 3x, 5 times 3 is negative 15, 5 plus negative 3 is positive 2. So that's when you know you've done it right. Then you take these two numbers and you fill it into your two boxes. Doesn't matter which one goes in which box, just you can flip-flop them either way, it's going to work. Now that we've filled in the rest of our boxes, we can go ahead and actually fill out the outside. Remember over here, we had the outside and we found the inside, and now we're moving backwards. So, what times what equals x squared? Well, x times x equals x squared. Over here, we say, what times x equals 5x? Well, that would be 5. Over here, what times x equals negative 3x? Well, that would be a negative 3. So that's what we're going to put there. Once you've done that, you've pretty much finished the process. Then your whole answer is going to be y equals, and you take what you got on the outside of the boxes. So we have an x plus 5, because it's positive 5, and then x minus 3. Don't forget your y equals, because, again, we are rewriting an equation. So, all right, and that is how you factor. Let's do one more example of that. Okay, so let's start with our box. Okay. All right, so just like before, we start with our first term. First term in the top left box, third term in the bottom right box. All right, once you do those two, you got to start the diamond. Now, first term times the third term equals 15x squared. So that's what you put up here. Alright, and then remember your third term, your second term is what goes down here. This setup is so standard, you always have to follow the same set of rules. Okay, and now we ask ourselves, what two numbers multiply to make 15x squared and add to make 8x. Okay, and after thinking for a while, you always want to start with the factor, right? Think of what multiplies to 15 and pick the pair that also adds to 8. So we know that 5x goes here, 3x goes here, because 5 times 3 is 15. 5 plus 3 equals 8. So we're ready to fill in our boxes. Okay, oops, gosh, I'm just making mistake after mistake here. Okay, so now that we've done that, we just have to do the last step, which is to fill in the outside of our boxes. So what times what equals x squared? Well, it's going to be x times x. X times what equals 5x? It's going to be 5. X times what equals 3x? That's going to be 3. So our final product is going to be x plus 5 times x plus 3. Alright, and that is how you factor. Now, let's go ahead and go back and do those graphing form examples. Okay, so when we're doing graphing form, we are still going to be using a box, but the setup this time is different. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and rewrite my equation here so I have a second one to refer to. And go ahead and draw my box. Alright, so now notice the differences in setup. The first step is the same. You put your first term in this box. Okay, but the next step is where things get different. This time, we aren't going to fill in this bottom box here. Instead, we're going to take our second term, and say, okay, 2x divided by 2. We're always going to do a division by 2 at this step. that equals 1x. So you're going to take that 1x and you're going to put it in each of these boxes. What we just did was we took this middle term and just split it into two to fill in these two boxes. Every time that's what you'll do. Take the middle term, divide it by 2, and 1 goes in each box. Now, once you've done that part, you can go ahead and fill in the outside. We need to fill in the outside in order to know what's going to go in the last box. So what times what equals x squared? Well, x times x equals x squared. Now, x times what equals 1x? Just 1. And same thing over here. X times what equals 1x? Just 1. So now that we have the outsides, we can know that for this last box, 1 times 1 is what we're going to multiply to find it, and that's just going to equal 1. Now, at the end of this process, in this box, essentially what our end goal was to get all of these terms in this equation. Now we have x squared, we have 2x, but we don't have negative 15. Instead, we have 1. That's a little bit of a problem. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, so far I have x plus 1 times x plus 1. But if I just stick to x plus 1 times x plus 1, I don't get that negative 15. I get 1. So we ask ourselves, how do I get from 1 to negative 15? Well, I know that if I do 1 minus 16, that equals negative 15. This is it right here. The fact that I had to subtract 16 in order to go from 1 to negative 15 is the key. So that tells me that in addition to my x plus 1 times x plus 1, I just need to subtract 16 to achieve my final product. So I can rewrite this in a nicer way. X plus 1 times x plus 1 is just x plus 1 squared. So I'll rewrite that. And then that minus 16 still stays there. And that is it. So usually the part that people struggle with the most is figuring out this minus 16. And you just have to remember, how do you get from this box to this number? Okay, and we're done with that one. Let's do one more example. Alright, so we will start by making the box again. Okay, and our setup. So first top left box is going to be x squared because that's what our first term is. And I forgot to move it down. Let's move it down. Alright. So I'm going to rewrite my equation here just like before. Okay, so the next part is to go ahead and take your middle term and divide it by 2. So 8x divided by 2 equals 4x. So that's what we get to put in these two boxes. Okay, now we get to fill in the outsides. So x times x gets us x squared. X times 4 would be what we need for 4x. Okay, and then that means a 4 goes here too. Top and side should always be the same in this process. Okay, and over here, 4 times 4, that's going to equal 16. Now, this tells us that our equation is going to be y equals x plus 4 squared. It's always going to be this thing squared. And then, on the end, we need to know that other part. Now, here's the deal. We have 16. We want to get to 15. And in order to get from 16 to 15, we need to subtract 1. 16 minus 1 is how we're going to get to that 15. So that tells me that I need to take that minus 1 and put it in my equation. And then I am done. Alright, that's it for today. That is factoring and completing the square. On the next page here, I have included a bunch of steps, so please refer to that if you're having any trouble. This is really like clear steps.